All right, thanks everyone. So we're here to talk about what makes a successful CMO. I don't feel like beating around the bush a little bit. I'd love to know from you, what are leading edge companies asking of their CMOs these days, and what's changed recently?
Absolutely. Well, I'll tell you what, leading CEOs, when they're looking for a CMO, the first thing we recognize is that they're asking for the CMO to do more and more. So the brief, which used to be narrow, is no longer narrow. It's ever expanding. My colleague Tom Seklow refers to this as the superhero CMO, which is very difficult to achieve. But we used to just have a focus on brand. Now we must have not only brand at the table, but performance marketing. And finding a CMO who can really encompass all of those things is very rare.
Well, frankly, there aren't that many people like that, as you're saying. So what do you do? I mean, basically, CMOs don't either typically grow up through the brand side or the performance marketing side. So how do they find people like this?
Yeah, so I mean, I think the biggest challenges for marketers today, and in the audience you guys may recognize this about yourself, is that if you grew up in the performance marketing realm, you may find that actually your own brand fundamentals are not as robust as they need to be to make that next leap in leadership. And equally for people who grew up in the brand side, their performance marketing skills are not strong enough. And so what we really encourage people as they're kind of climbing the ladder to become CMO is to really broaden out as best they can. And that broadening can come in a whole variety of lenses. It can come from working with colleagues cross-functionally. It can come from taking classes online. It can come from taking on a project that's outside your comfort zone.
Great. Well, let's talk about, I've got a couple of stats here that I found from some articles that you wrote. And one is that the bench strength of CMOs is a bit of an issue, what they have to work with. So something like 50% of CMOs can't actually identify their successor right now. And that seems like there's a problem all the way up and down the ladder.
Yeah, absolutely. So the bench strength for CMOs is really an issue for them, and it's an issue in two perspectives. One is there isn't the strength to come up behind them, even though we see increasing CMO tenure. One of the things that translates to in the organization is that roughly 80% of people who work beneath a CMO say they don't get the training as part of their corporate culture that they want and need in order to develop. And while that might just sound like complaining, folks in this new generation actually vote with their feet. So many of them say, I'll be moving on to my next thing within 2 years, because if I can't find that learning opportunity here, I'll have to find it somewhere else. So our advice to executive teams is make sure that the training you're offering in-house is robust enough. And again, that can come through not necessarily fancy training programs, but it can come through cross-functional programs, rotating people, creating a buddy system between marketing and IT. It can come from outsourcing your own people to your agency partners for a time. There are lots of ways to be creative about this, to build that bench strength and to give your CMO a successor.
Now, assuming that everyone's really the CMO of themselves and they're managing their own career path, what are the things that either an existing CMO can do to kind of increase their ability to span both sides of the brand and performance thing? And frankly, it should apply to the same way to more junior folks as well. So what are the things that you would do if you were in their shoes?
So the number one thing we say is know the customer. And I think you heard a number of speakers earlier today talk about this. Julie Bornstein spoke about it. John Potter spoke about it. It's so critical to know the customer and really think about that person across touch points. So not just how do they experience the advertising, whatever platform that happens on, but how do they experience the product, customer service, everything else. Think about your own self as a consumer. So, one of my favorite CMOs made an amazing transition from being a marketer at a high-tech software and hardware company to becoming a marketer at a pharmaceutical company marketing a schizophrenia and bipolar drug. And she said, I can take the foundational skills I have from my marketing toolkit, but I have to go learn this customer. And so she went and listened in on call center calls. She went to support groups. She went and talked to doctors and nurses and was able to make that transition. And interestingly enough, if we look at companies who've changed marketing officers in the last year, 75% of them have gone external to make that hire. And of those, a third have come from outside the industry. So we say, if you focus on knowing the customer as a fundamental, you can actually take your marketing toolkit and move from industry to industry.
Excellent. Good to know. And what else do people do if they were trying to build up these skills on the way up to a CMO?
Yeah, I think the second thing we encourage people to focus on is really being curious. It's so important to be a lifelong learner and think about how do you experiment and fail. So it's not enough to just sort of stay in your comfort zone, but how do you become that lifelong learner? There's a great guy who made the transition from being in a luxury goods company in London, moving all the way to Portland to work for a company headquartered there. And he said, right, I'm going to use my own network of folks and continue to learn from them. I'll take the foundation of what I know, and then I'll take all the things they're experimenting with, and I'll try them in my role and see how that works out for me. And not be afraid of failing, but go back to that network and say, what happened here? How can I learn from this experience? So we encourage you to do that, particularly if you're on one side of the house or the other. If you're a brand person and you've never spent time with a performance marketing team, go get that experience.
Great. And to do this, it sounds like you need to be more of a leader as well, which means essentially communicating more, figuring out what it is the customer experience is. But then there are lots of parts of the organization that are either doing their own thing or don't want to hear it. So
That's
then
right.
what? I mean, is the CMO going to be the glue for all of these things?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the major transitions we see for CMOs today is actually moving from being kind of a member of the executive team to being an integrator across functions. And that's a critical leadership competency for them. And so it's not enough to just rely on the data to tell your story. You also have to be a good influencer. You have to be persuasive. So a wonderful CMO I know who became the CMO of a Las Vegas hotel and had to build it from scratch, had to figure out how do I differentiate this from every other casino on the Strip. She was able to really paint that differentiated product and actually convince her entire leadership team of how they were going to differentiate the brand. That gave her perfect leeway to do some really interesting and innovative things like hire a graffiti artist to do an art installation, or create a secret bar menu, or replace the Bible by the side of the bed with an art book, because she was able to get everybody aligned behind her vision. And those leadership and persuasiveness skills are really critical.
Great. And then there's an old saying, and I'm probably going to misquote it horribly, 50% of all advertising is wasted, we just don't know which half. I mean, is that going to cut it going forward? I mean, I'm biased, I'm a quant. I would like to think that we can measure all of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the days of not knowing which half of your budget is effective are completely over. So measurement is absolutely key. But I think the importance for really strong CMOs today is not to just measure everything, but to measure what's important for your company. So increasingly we see CMOs not measured only on their own performance, but actually seeing their bonuses based on company performance. So that revenue piece is incredibly important. There's CMO of a top 200 internet retailer who actually they measure everything from their NPS score to their customer service scores, and they actually care. The focus of the company is about exceptional customer service, and so he goes down to the word detail and measures the number of wows they get in their customer reviews, because they view that that's a key indicator of how people will order again in the future, which of course drives revenue.
Excellent. Have they correlated that yet?
I think they're working on it.
Okay, great. Excellent. And then what else? It's very easy to be siloed if you're coming up, particularly from the performance side. I'd love to hear, how do you get out of that?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think particularly people who are good at something, whether it's the performance side or the brand side, if you're good at something and you get positive recognition for being good at it, it can be difficult to walk away from that and to try to expand outward. But in the same way that we see chief marketing officers have trouble finding their successor on their bench, I would encourage people at the mid stage of their career to also focus on what their bench looks like. There's no way for you to expand out and take on other projects and become more well-rounded if you're not also delegating and mentoring others around you. So if you're really good at something that you do, take on somebody else in the organization, teach them how to become an expert at it, free up some of your time to raise your hand for a project that may feel wildly outside your comfort zone, and become better rounded. My big fear about marketing for the future is that if we have a host of specialists within marketing, how will we have a CMO in the future who is able to kind of lead that orchestra of specialists if they don't bring the breadth with them? So it's important to be well-rounded.
So then, great points. The bench often isn't there just for the CMO. There tend to be specialists, at least on the digital side. And in my experience, the specialists on the digital side tend to like staying in their silos and being really good at it.
Yeah.
So it's all very well to say, hey, everyone, please be more rounded, look around you, take on extra projects and so on. But if I'm the CMO and I'm trying to get the most out of my team, what other things can I do? Because I can't just sit there and let everyone continue. Otherwise, they'll get bored, they'll get burned out, they'll leave, and I have to do something.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the most successful CMOs we see today are really trying to create fully integrated marketing teams. So really thinking about, instead of specialists, how do I create best athletes? So folks who maybe started as a specialist, but then have picked up work from other areas, and really that cross-pollination not only is great for retention, but it actually can create competitive advantage for the company, because actually hiring in specialists over and over again who get poached from your organization is an expensive way to retain talent.
Right. So is it sometimes better to ship people out? I mean, how can you retain people if there's only so many opportunities?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends on the size of the company, right? So some of the bigger companies we see have official rotation programs. Some of them are able to really successfully say, you're going to spend a month here. Some create digital centers of excellence and kind of rotate people through them. At a smaller organization, it can be hard to do that. And if you're at one of those, trying to talk to your leadership team about saying, I will do some extra projects, I will raise my hand for this because it's important to my own career, I think is an important opportunity. Great.
Okay, so say we're in a slightly different situation. We're a company that doesn't have a lot of technology DNA. And we have to find a way to bring it in here because there's not a company I can think of that frankly shouldn't have this technology DNA embedded in it, and marketing is often one of these touch points that makes it all happen. Now what? Sounds difficult. What is a CMO to do in those situations?
Yeah, I think we worked with a company like that recently. They're a sort of pharmaceutical direct-to-consumer or a consumer brand that you would know, but they had no direct-to-consumer arm, and they wanted to get into that business. And so they asked us to help them find somebody to lead that business for them. And the first question we asked was about executive support. So you bring somebody in here who knows how to do this, but they hit roadblocks every way till Sunday in order to be able to achieve their goal. How does that help the business achieve its objectives? So I think if you're a marketer and you're entertaining an opportunity like that, you want to understand and really believe and do your diligence that the executive team really does want to go on this journey. Now, part of what we find when companies do go on that journey is that instead of just hiring a chief marketing officer, they might hire a chief digital officer instead. And the sort of key difference between a chief digital officer and a chief marketing officer is that chief digital officers go in with an enterprise-wide mandate. So it's not just about marketing, but it's about how all of the parts of the organization interact. And then the other differentiator is that chief digital officers behaviorally are actually more disruptors than chief marketing officers. It turns out that chief marketing officers care more about being liked than being disruptive most of the time. So a chief digital officer comes in kind of purposely to break glass, and therefore we hypothesize that their tenure may well be shorter, although it's a little bit early to tell. So we like to see that some organizations create these sort of digital centers of excellence, bring in this talent, make sure there's a way for it to be really successful and sponsored, and then try to bleed that organization out into the rest of the broader organization and kind of dissolve it once it's taken root.
Perfect. So question about the balance. Now, we have people who are right-brained, people who are left-brained, quants, people who are more on the brand side. I'd love to understand where the pendulum is, because it tends to swing from side to side, and where you think this is going to go in the next few years.
Yeah, I would say in the last 5 years, we have seen the pendulum swing heavily towards performance marketing, particularly with the emergence of so many new tools and things that can be measured. We really had CEOs asking us to find people who are experts in that area. And in the last, call it I don't know, 18 months or so, we have seen that pendulum swing back towards brand. And I think the reason for that is because as performance marketing becomes more and more expensive, we're finding that companies who have a strong brand identity and presence and understand the promise of what their company is delivering have a greater halo effect, and it becomes more affordable to acquire customers when those two things work in tandem together rather than relying on performance marketing alone in the absence of brand.
Excellent. And is this applying to the sort of Silicon Valley companies or other companies as well?
I would say, the folks who took up performance marketing in its biggest effort were Silicon Valley companies to begin with. So those are the folks we see the pendulum switching back on. And I would say that folks who are outside the Valley probably maintained more of a balance in the first place.
Great. Perfect. So we have a little bit of time for questions.
Great.
You got some time?
Yep.
Excellent. So we'll take a couple of questions from the audience. I see a hand over there. Can't see very much, but I can see a hand over there.
We'll wait for a mic. It's coming.
Right here.
Excellent.
Hi, I'm Samir. Would you be able to suggest any courses or trainings for the brand side of things?
Yeah, sure. So in fact, I tried to do my homework before I got here, always a good idea. And I went on to a couple of different platforms, so I'll name 3, all of which have terrific brand offerings, which are pretty affordable. Lynda.com, which is now, of course, owned by LinkedIn, Coursera, and General Assembly, all really strong. And those are sort of, they range from kind of, week-long sessions to in-person sessions to slightly longer. But interestingly, with the advent of sort of online learning, a lot of the more, if you will, kind of brand name universities offer semester-long courses for certificates in marketing if you really want to do a deep dive, and those are all available online.
Hi, I'm Jill. Just in this conference, you've heard so many buzzwords, whether it's fractured attribution, 100% personalization. What do you see CMOs feeling as their top 3 things that are keeping them up at night? What are they stressing about these days?
Yeah, so in the most macro sense, what I see them stressing about is actually the proliferation of technology and how to make sense of it holistically. So many of them have many agencies and partners and vendors who serve them across the marketing mix, and increasingly the need to manage all of those folks is becoming part of their responsibility, and making sure that they are well versed and how do they stay on top of what's happening is probably the biggest thing that keeps them up at night.
You talked about Chief Digital Officer and Chief Marketing Officer, and one's being disruption-oriented, one being more, let's all get along. The question I have is about customer experience, and we've heard from several CMOs this afternoon that are deeply involved in the customer experience. So what's the tug of war look like there from where you sit?
Like a tug of war. I think it's a great characterization. Chief marketing officers who are doing that great job of moving from thinking that their role is about customer acquisition to thinking that their role is about customer experience. Most of the time we find that they live in organizations that don't go hire chief digital officers because they are playing that role. And the second part of that, we find that chief digital officers don't get hired where the CMO and the CIO have a really strong integrated relationship. When there is a CDO involved, it often, not always, but often means that the chief marketing officer is maybe not as digital or digitally oriented. And so the tug of war becomes about how do you make those things work holistically, and how do you think about the customer from start to finish? And where we like to see that tug of war end is people kind of leaving their egos in the back room and saying, let's make this about the customer, so that the customer wins, the company wins, and not having it be about a turf war.
Great. One last very quick question, and then we'll have to wrap up.
I think it'll be quick. As we see companies like Gap Inc. eliminating, hi, I'm here in the center,
I gotcha.
eliminating
Thank
the
you.
role of CMO, do you think that's indicative of things to come, the role itself being antiquated and not just defining the responsibilities within the role, but the role itself evolving in the future?
I think the role will certainly evolve. I don't think that it goes away. I think every company is different, and of course, the Gap, specifically has a lot of different brands, and so question about what's the role there and how does the title work, I think is a symptom of that company trying to innovate, and I applaud them for that. But I think that the need for somebody who is the voice of the consumer internally, who acts as an advisor to not only the CEO but the whole C-suite, who doesn't just think about acquisition but thinks about the whole customer experience and who really integrates across the organization, I see the need for that role continuing no matter what it's called.
All right. Thank you all very much.
Thanks.
Thank you.